The Ensombl Advice South Africa podcast is intended for professional financial advisors. All discussion is limited to publicly available information and should not be interpreted as legal, professional, or financial advice. Ensombl Advice is not a licensed financial services provider and does not provide financial services. Before making investment decisions, you should obtain financial advice from a qualified financial advisor.
Hi, I'm Louis van der Merwe, Certified Financial Planner. Join me every week where I get to have discussions with global leaders in the financial planning space to help you serve your clients better and run a more efficient financial planning practice. This is Financial Planners South Africa podcast.
Portfolio Metrics is thrilled to bring you this podcast in support of our common passion for people and the evolution of wealth management. Our global business links precision investment management to expert financial advice through partnerships and technology. Portfolio Metrics is an authorized financial services provider. ComSpace is a revenue management solution developed specifically for independent financial advisors. It is a web-based application that tracks, allocates, and manages advisor revenue. The system seamlessly reads commission statements from financial institutions and can address any permutation of commission splits. ComSpace provides mind-blowing, out-the-box revenue business intelligence and analytics, along with super flexible reporting to effectively manage and grow your business.
Welcome to another episode of Ensombl Advice South Africa. Today I have in the studio with me Dr. Meghaan Lurtz. For a lot of you, that name might be familiar. If you read any of the Kitsis.com articles that come out, Meghaan is a senior research nerd there. And Meghaan, I just saw your top 5 strength finders on the Kitsis.com platform, and we happen to share a few which I think that learner, right? And it comes through in all of the work you do. For people that are not familiar maybe with what you do, can you give us like a little bit of a background just on your story into the financial services world?
Yeah. So like many people in financial services I have found over the years, there was some nepotism involved in me getting into this industry. My mom is the CIO of a rebalancing platform called Total Rebalance Expert, and I went to work for her. And I happened to be at like a TD Ameritrade conference, and I started talking to this financial planner, but he was also a professor at Texas Tech University, and he was like, and I had my master's in psychology, and I was talking to him about how I would talk to these advisors, and we would be working on rebalancing their portfolio, because like Billy needed to go back to rehab, or Sandra, crashed the car, or they were about to have this big vacation. Like sometimes it was a nice thing, and, and so they needed to get money out of the portfolio. And so you would start with like talking about portfolio things, but you would end with like family things. So I'm having this conversation with this advisor slash professor, Dr. Barry Mulholland, who's now at Akron State. And, he was like, if you like all this stuff, like, that there are actually people that are studying like the emotions and family dynamics around money. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, they're at Texas Tech and they're at Georgia. And if you want to, and Kansas State, and if you want to meet them, I'll help you. And so, he didn't have to do that. It was just like sort of one of those amazing happenstance moments of a very kind man. And, he did just that. He introduced me to Dr. Sonia Lutter and Dr. Christy Archuleta, and I had a conversation with them, immediately signed up for their master's program. 2 classes into their master's program, signed up for their PhD, finished my PhD. And around that time, I was looking for work. I'm a military spouse, and so we move around a lot, so finding a stable job can be challenging at times. And 2 of my classmates, Dr. Lawson and Dr. Tharp, both named Derek, were working for Michael, and they were like, you should, like, there's this woman that we know, and she's pretty smart. She knows the things, and she doesn't really, she has to move around. So like, maybe you can even get her at a really good rate. And so they helped me to meet Michael, and Michael and I hit it off, and just because Michael also loves the psychology of financial planning and the relationships in financial planning. As much as he loves all the tax stuff too, I secretly think, even though Michael may never say it out loud, that he actually loves the psychology stuff the most out of all the things that we do. So we bonded over that, and I started writing continuing education questions for Michael. And then, as time sort of went on, I was like, I can write, Michael. And he was like, oh, yeah. So I started writing for the platform, and then I started writing very regularly for the platform. Now I write at least 18 articles a year. I'm a professor at Columbia University in New York. I teach the financial psychology class. I'm a professor of practice at Kansas State University, teach a fair number of financial planning classes as well as, or advanced financial planning classes, as well as financial therapy classes. And I also, every once in a while, teach at Maryland, and I hope to be doing some teaching at the American College as well. But for Michael, I do research and writing. We do research on financial planners on the Kitces platform, and I'm technically like on the research team, even though I spend a lot of time with the editorial team because I write at least 18 articles a year for the platform. So amongst all of those things, I'm in between, running on some kids, those things too.
How do you go about filtering out from the lists and lists of different topics that you can pick from? Because it feels like whatever doesn't fit in the technical space, falls on your plate. But then how does the team, I'm assuming, narrow that down to something that says, hey, this is really what our audience would care about or what financial planners would care about?
I spend a lot of time talking to financial advisors. Every quarter for the past almost 2 years now, I've conducted, you can think of it as like qualitative research. I kind of have like a set of, so many questions, and I will set up interviews with somewhere between 15 and 25 advisors and talk to them about how they talk to their clients, what they talk to their clients about, how this particular meeting is conducted versus this particular meeting. What do they have questions about? What do they struggle with? So I'm always talking to advisors. And then, I do have the wonderful opportunity to be surrounded by people like Michael Kitces, Jeff Levine, Ben and Adam and Erica and Sydney, all members of the Kitces team that are always like, hey, do you know something about this? Like, this behavior is happening. Can you tell me why that's happening? So there's that as well. There's always people around with lots of opinions at the Kitces platform. And so getting to hear those and nerd out with those people is wonderful. I also do a lot of speaking. And so at the speaking events, which is actually how I know that you listened to my most recent webinar, that webinar came to be because of all of the speaking events that I was doing. I had a number of advisors asking me after I gave the presentation that I was giving, hey, well, I have these review meetings and it's kind of like barring, like, do you have any suggestions for that? And so I was just asked that so many times that I thought, well, should probably do something about that. So I talk to a lot of advisors a lot.
I mean, that makes so much sense, right? So bringing in real world struggles that financial advisors are having and saying, okay, let's try and figure that out. Have you seen a shift in the types of concerns? Has there been a major change in what people are worried about, generally, the end client?
It sort of surrounds two things. And I can say that it's certainly changed, like the interest level and things like that. But, there's some scary statistics out there, worldwide statistics. This is not just like a US problem, that it's like 8 out of 10 financial advisors that get started fail. Like it's a hard business. It's a hard business to get started in. It's hard to find clients. And so as much as they probably want to ask me about their client relationships, we talk a lot about prospecting relationships, because if you don't have a business, it's kind of hard for me to tell you about your business. So I get asked a lot about, how to meet prospects, how to talk to prospects, what's motivating for prospects, how to think about those initial meetings where we want to build trust, we want to demonstrate value. We also hopefully will meet somebody that we like and then be able to, convince them to come to the other side, as a client. So there's that. People ask me a lot about that. And then I also get asked just a fair amount about how to have deeper client conversations. That and that's probably the thing that has changed the most, the number of people that are becoming more interested in that. And in fact, this is sort of an odd thing and really just kind of it's anecdotal, it's just my experience. But I find that I get even more of those questions I get a great number of those questions from financial planners outside of the United States, just because financial planning is done in such a different way, or doesn't have to be, but oftentimes it is. That a big differentiator, maybe than other things, is this human side, of financial planning. And so I find that there's actually quite a few advisors in India and in Italy and Spain and in South Africa that are more interested oftentimes in talking about the human side of things and maybe less about the tax side of things. But that could also just be because my tax system is very different than yours. And so they're like, well, why talk about that? But again, just my anecdotal experience that financial advisors worldwide are quite interested in what it means to be human and how to be better with other humans.
Yeah, I think I've experienced the same. If you think about the life-centered planning, if you think about George Kinder's work, the Sudden Money Institute, these are all things that, irrespective of where you are in the world, you can apply that,
right,
not only to your clients, but to your relationships.
Oh, yeah.
If you had to create a training program from scratch for someone that have maybe been in the industry, let's call it 15, 20 years, that are saying, hey, I want to sharpen my skills. I think I'm technically good. Like, where would you start? What would be the type of skills that you would focus on most? We often hear people talk about communication or kind of emotional intelligence. Do you think there's a certain process, or is it really dependent on the person?
I think it's probably a mix of both. Nothing is ever one thing perfectly or the other. So for sure, life planning and the financial transitionists, the sudden money people, I'm friends and like in these circles, like these are my people, So if you've never done that or never experienced that or been a part of one of those groups, I would highly recommend it. And again, some people may not like what I'm about to say next, but I think this is not just like financial planners. This is just what happens. So when you have 20 years of experience, whether it's my 20 years of experience as a professor, or it's 20 years of experience as a financial planner, or 20 years of experience as a medical doctor, you begin, because we all do, we walk into the room and we know the answers. I know what you're going to ask me. I've taught the Black-Scholes model like 70,000 times. Like, I know when you're going to have a problem. And financial planners think, I've talked to like 1,000 people getting a divorce. This isn't new to me. And I'm not saying that that's bad. That's great that we have so much life knowledge and experience knowledge. But this is where it gets tricky. For that person, this is their first time and they are vulnerable. And we can sometimes forget, with all of the knowledge that we have, just how vulnerable that feels. And I teach a lot of financial planners. I work with a lot of financial planners. One of my favorite things to ask, especially well-tenured financial planners, is, who's your financial planner? And they usually say something like, oh, I don't have one. And I'm like, well, how can you possibly imagine what it's like to be your client if you've never had that done? I get that you probably have lots of stuff in order and stuff like that, but imagine showing that to like another professional. And a lot of financial planners have amazing origin stories, why they became a financial planner. And I would say 50% of the time it's because like something bad happened. And to have to talk about like that painful experience, to be vulnerable enough to be on that other side and think like, oh God, like this professional might judge me. That level of vulnerability, that level of just sort of being humble, trying to come alongside, really trying to step into what your clients go through. I think is an invaluable practice and not something that I know that if you are a life planner, you get life planned, which is pretty amazing. I think that that's great. Everybody should go through that. But unfortunately, we don't have that just for even doing good financial planning. And I wish so. Like every once in a while, we have like Slack at the Kids' platform. And then every once in a while it asks like, if you could invent a conference, like what would you invent? And that would be my conference. I would just have lots of financial planners come. Everybody gets partnered up with a person that you don't know. And you have to do it like every 5 years, because we should do financial planning, not a financial plan. And so every 5 years, you should have to come back, partnered with somebody new, talk about your different financial goals, open up your financial books, have another professional be like, okay, let's, talk about those things. I think that not only that would just be a good practice so that everybody is financially healthy, but also, you'll really remember, you'll definitely know, how it feels to be that client.
And you'll probably learn quite a few things in that process to say, oh, this person didn't listen to me, or maybe I do that. I wonder if going through therapy could almost be a process, or having a relationship with a therapist could be kind of a shortcut to experience some of that vulnerability.
Yeah. I, at K-State where I teach and at Columbia when I teach the financial psychology class, that's usually something that I tell students. I'm like, this next 8 weeks, it's going to be like your therapy. And what I would encourage you to do after the end of this 8 weeks, if you want to continue, to learn about yourself and to learn about communication, see a therapist, not because there's anything wrong, but just because it feels good to be spoken to in that way. Like it can be such a great example of how to have patience with resistance and things like that, that it's an invaluable experience. I'm a longtime therapy user, and it's great. I think Brendan Fraser, everybody in South Africa tends to love Brendan Fraser. I also love him. And I know that he talks very openly about, his experience in therapy and things like that, and how having had that experience as a financial advisor changed his life on just the way he thought about his ability to communicate with others.
Yeah, we've seen the same in our business, where we've prompted people to say, hey, make use of this. We'll even pay for it, just so that you get comfortable with that type of relationship, the vulnerability, but also being able to go to those spaces, right? Often hear people talk about just kind of journaling, right, in this process, yet it's not something that we would think of telling advisors to do, like especially in the early years. It's about, hey, find your prospects. And in South Africa, we have these big insurance companies, and I'm sure you would be fairly similar, where you start your list of 100 people, and there you go.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about kind of those early years of finding the right fit, the right people that you need to serve? Like I see that people struggle so much with that right at the beginning years.
Well, it's hard. It's hard for any number of reasons. It can be hard because the average consumer doesn't trust financial people. So even if it's like the 100 people that they're still just like, oh, come on. So that can be a bit, you're already sort of fighting an uphill battle in a way. And then it's also weird for the financial advisor that, maybe you don't want to like call your friends, that isn't always fun. And it can be difficult to find people. And then on top of that, because certainly at the Kids' platform, we talk a lot about the benefits of having a niche, like really knowing who you're going to serve and how you're going to serve them. Carl Richards, talks about like you've got the bus and you've got 50 people, like who do you want to fill your bus with? And like, I love Carl. I always think that's like such and for whatever reason, I don't know why this is. I always think about he's taking his bus to like one of those crazy music festivals. I don't know why.
I think it's the beard. It must be the beard, Carl.
Something that Carl would necessarily do.
Burning Man.
Yeah, I'm just like, we're going to Burning Man. I'm like, okay, Carl, like that's one way to start a party. I don't think he goes to Burning Man. But anyway, so that's Carl's thing. But I think it's hard to know that. It's like telling somebody, well, when you decide you want to get married, like just like find your partner. Well, unless you've dated like 50 people and know like, okay, I don't like that. And that chewing is really loud and annoying. Like, unless you figure out what it is that you like or don't like, who it is that you really enjoy working with and who it is that you don't. So there's going to be a time in there where you're just serving people to serve people. And to your point about journaling, like if you were actively thinking about that, for that first couple of years, like what do I like and what do I not like, about these different clients, then, maybe like 3 or 4 years in when you're stable, then you could say, okay, yeah, these 10 gotta go, these 10 are okay for right now. And I'm going to only search for more people like these 10. But you now have something to go on. Like I write a lot about on the Kitsis platform that, humans are bad future forecasters. We're like really bad at guessing what's going to make us happy. And, the types of clients that we'll like and things like that. You may think one thing and then wind up someplace else. And so I don't know that, even though I believe that niching is the right way, I don't think you have to know. That's like, life is one of those things. It's just like one big experiment. All that really matters is that you get started and that you learn stuff. And sometimes you're going to learn, it worked. And other times you're going to learn like, oh, that crashed and burned. But either way, like if you're looking at it as though this is just a learning process, I'm supposed to just be here and trying stuff. I wanted to do financial planning. I wanted to be a financial planner. I'm doing that. Sometimes I like it more than others, but, I'm doing the thing that I set out to do. And I think that, giving ourselves a little bit of grace, having a little bit of patience in that first couple of years, instead of just that mounting pressure to be doing it exactly right and have the exact niche and know exactly how to talk about it so that like thousands of leads just come storm your door. I don't think that happens for anyone but Carl, but only because he said he's going to Burning Man. And so it's just like, like you have to you just have to get in there and get started and be okay with it being kind of screwy for a couple of years, and then like transition to something that feels maybe less screwy.
Meghaan, I love that because it takes away all of the pressure. It's all of that pressure around.
There's an immense pressure to just be doing it right from day one. And I talk to hundreds, if not thousands of financial planners, ones that are very good and they still don't know. So just let that go.
And we're also probably quite bad at remembering those relationships, right?
Yeah.
The ones that worked and the ones that didn't work.
Yes.
And I like what you're saying, like create the data, and then you can go back and say, okay, what is this telling me? Like, is there a theme? Is there a story coming through? Yeah, like, are you hearing people doing this? Like, are they tagging? Okay. Hey, we found your next article.
Really. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that's hard is that, financial planning in and of itself is kind of like a very siloed profession. People are lonely. And we don't talk to each other as, I think that's becoming less of a thing. I think we are finding pockets of communities, whether it's life planners or XY planning network or the transitionists or the therapists, like people are finding the tax nerds, like, people are finding other people to come together and talk about the good stuff and the bad stuff, what's worked and what's not. One thing that I've heard a lot lately, and I'm not quite sure just like if it's the group of people that I'm hanging out with or what, but I've talked to a lot of financial advisor men that are about my age. So they've got to be in their late 30s, early 40s. And they have all been talking about having a mentor and just like another guy who was doing, financial planning, kind of like them, but yet kind of different. And they have really learned a lot, from that relationship, being able to share woes and being able to talk about prospecting and being able to talk about like, what's your financial plan look like? Okay, this is what my financial plan looks like. And I think that that's great. I know that is what happens at Kansas State University. It's also what happens at Columbia, because we're teaching master's students, or I'm teaching master's students primarily at those universities, if not PhD students. And so oftentimes these are individuals that already have their practice. They already have their CFP. And yes, we are teaching them like other skills and knowledge and things like that related to the doing of financial planning. But the other thing that is beautiful is just you now have these 5 classes, 8 weeks each, where you're pretty much in the same cohort with these, 20 other people. And so you are learning about their practice and they're learning about your practice, and, you're connecting with each other. It's just the peer-to-peer learning and the peer-to-peer knowledge transfer is amazing to watch. And I think, again, I believe that the stuff that we're teaching is important and, school matters. But I think that the friendships, relationships, the learnings that they have from each other, practitioner to practitioner, is by far the important part of those programs.
I want to talk a little bit more about this mentorship idea, specifically advisors that have been maybe, slightly longer tenure and are thinking about, how do I grow my business? We've seen it in South Africa typically with people starting out, right? They would be partnered with a mentor that would teach them predominantly sales skills. But what you're talking about is something different. For people that might think, hey, I could be a mentor to someone else. Like, what are the things that you would look for in a good mentor?
Someone that you can be honest with. I know that sounds maybe obvious, but like you have to want to share. Like mentors and mentees, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not just like, I'm going to knowledge dump on you. Like there should be information transfer both ways. And it's important that relationship can be open and honest about like, ooh, I had a rough quarter. I need to talk about that. Or, there's been family things that have happened and I need to talk about that. So just having somebody that you feel you can really be honest with. So maybe similar to even, another thing that matters, I think, is that you have maybe similar values. And again, that may sound very obvious, but like if you're a fee-only planner, not that you can't work with somebody that, isn't a fee-only planner, but there's the things about the way that you do financial planning that are going to make more sense to this other person. And so I think that's important. Those are probably the two big ones, because it's not even necessarily important that you do everything the same, that there really maybe should be some disagreement, between the two of you, and that mix about just learning different ways, as the expression goes, maybe, like, I'm assuming this is a universal expression, but I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know what the expression is and what it would be in Spanish. They probably think that's weird if you said it. More than one way to skin a cat, like I find
so
that
my cat's scratching at the door. Hopefully she's not listening.
Even a lot of the stuff that I write about in terms of psychology, like you mentioned, life planning and George Kinder, who I love. But I look at his questions and I think, I've seen George say things, and just like even the way he moves, like when he does it, I could never do that. Like I'm not George. I look different than George. I act different than George. And so like when I walk into a room, I may command the room still, but I'm going to command it in a different way. And so under like his life planning questions, those 3 questions that he asked, the dream of freedom question, and then the you're going to die in 5 years question, and then you're going to die tomorrow question. Those are amazing, but I don't know that many planners that are like, oh yeah, that feels supernatural. I love asking those, like people are like, I've heard they're interesting. I definitely want to try them. And so when I wrote about them, I wrote about the underpinnings. Like, why does this work? When George says this, what's going on in this person's brain? And could there be something else that you could ask that might also get that going in someone's brain? But then you don't have to like be George. You can be you and still get it done. And so I think that it's very useful to talk to other people that maybe, again, have the same values as you, and you can be open with them, but that you're talking regularly about how you both go at the same issue, maybe in slightly different ways. And that's kind of like the science and the art, as we say, of financial planning. There's lots of different ways to do this, and no way is necessarily like the silver bullet. And, and I was talking about me and how I'm different from George, but George's clients are probably different from like my clients, and what works for my clients versus what works for George's clients might be very different. So there's there's just the dynamic of yourself. There's the dynamic between you and your clients. And these are things that are different from one financial advisor to another. And to have the opportunity to like try different stuff, talk about what worked, talk about what didn't, hear from this other person about what they tried and what worked and didn't work, that just the amount of knowledge that can be generated from that, the understanding of, not even if you're necessarily collecting data, but just it doesn't have to be just like this one. I love Michael. I think he's one of the smartest, loveliest people I've ever met in my life. I can tell you many times I have written articles and Michael just writes in the side, like in the notes, I would not say that. And so like, even between Michael and I who believe the same things, like I'm not Michael. Michael is not me. What I could say to my client is not what Michael would say to his. But if we can all understand, like, some of these underlying factors, then it no longer matters if it's Michael's way or my way. Like, it just becomes like, this is what it means to be human. If you want to pull this lever, here's a bunch of different ways to do it. Pick the one that makes the most sense for you. There was some great research that was done by Dr. Sonia Lutter and Dr. Grable, and they were looking at sort of like the stress and anxiety of the financial advisor. And then, and so they measured that with like finger stuff, and what they found was that those advisors that were more nervous, this transferred to their clients. And so like, again, if you like, I'm not like, George's questions are amazing, but if you walk in there and you're like, here we go. And, you're nervous about asking that question that's basically like, hey, you're dead. Tell me how do you feel about that? If you're nervous, your client's going to get nervous. And maybe a little bit of nerves is okay, but not a lot. Some of the research that we did on the Kitsis platform, we looked at personality types. Dr. Derek Tharp and I and Michael were looking at personality types, the big five. And of course, we found that those advisors that are less neurotic and more calm, they tended to be the better advisors. And, so it makes sense when you hear it out loud, like this is not rocket science or anything like that. But it's really important to understand that there is data that actually backs that up, from slightly different perspectives from Dr. Lutter and Grable, but also Derek and myself, finding similar patterns that how comfortable you are, the advisor, matters immensely to how comfortable the client is.
I mean, Meghaan, this drills back down into knowing yourself, having a mentor, getting to understand what it is that you're good at. But I'm wondering how much of this is kind of client expectations. Like, what if your client's not ready for these questions or not expecting it? Or is there a way to prime clients to say, hey, when we have these conversations, this is what you can expect?
Yeah, I think that goes back to even what we were talking about earlier, that it's one thing to be the asker, it's another thing to be the person that has to respond. And if you've never met with a financial planner before and like you think that they're going to ask you about your 401k, your retirement account, which can be scary enough to be like, oh, there's only this much money in it, feeling like there maybe should be another $100,000. Like, so that already feels yucky, to
what
like,
do other people have? Like, where?
Right.
Yeah.
But then for them to say something like the kinder questions, you're just like, whoa, wasn't ready for that. Like, not that it's not a good question, but like, people that can really catch people off guard. And I think that we sometimes forget that, as the financial advisor, because most financial advisors don't have a financial advisor that have life planned them. And so, to understand that whole experience from start to finish, to be in that vulnerable chair is a hard one. And I think that, yeah, it's about knowing yourself, but it's also about just really trying to, as much as you can, step into how vulnerable that can be for clients. A common thing that I tell financial advisors to do, and actually George, for whatever, says the opposite, but always tell people what you're going to ask them. Like, send them an email that's like, hey, thanks for like signing up. I can't wait to meet you on Tuesday, February 21st at 3:00. Here's 3 things that we're going to talk about. Here's 3 questions that I'm actually going to ask you that they'll maybe think about it and give you a better answer than like, I don't know, or yeah, I hope to retire. Like, people haven't, often been given the space to really think about financial goals and things like that. And so they either will answer with, I don't know, or a lot of times they'll answer with very broad things that, again, they think they're supposed to say, or, that like they think this will make them happy. And I don't mean that to sound like prospects and clients are dumb, but we haven't given them the space. It's typically not part of any society that I've ever met to talk about money and to talk about goals and to talk about life and things like those things are just not done. And so they're doing that for the first time in a financial planning office, talking to essentially a total stranger, about things that are very, very personal. And then we ask them what they're going to regret when they die. And you're just like, there may be a better way to set that up, and so I definitely think anytime you can send a note to the client and say, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. This also matters, like not only for the vulnerability thing, but it matters to adult learning. Like when you think about how adults learn, which is different than how kids learn, it's really important to sort of set that table so whether you make like a little Loom video and you're like, hey, I'm Megan and I love to talk about divorce and like, here's the things that we're going to talk about. And, here's kind of like what our financial planning software looks like. And it's, just like a 20-minute little snippet just to tell them, who are you and what are you going to talk about? And what are some things you're going to show them so that when they actually then arrive at the meeting, they may have thought a little bit about like the answer. So it would probably be a better answer. They're not really going to be surprised about some of the technology that we use. So instead of just like watching and being like, oh, this thing's happening in front of me and not really being able to generate questions in the moment. I mean, I've even tried this with my students that instead of doing a live lecture, I record all of my lectures. I'm sure some students just watch them at full-time speed, like, 3 times speed, like just because they don't want to hear me talk. That's fine. But, and then when we have class, part of their homework is to turn in questions that they had based on the lecture. And then that's what we do in live class. We talk about the questions or we talk about a case study, that would matter. And there's a lot more engagement. And I have even looked at test scores. Test scores have gone up since I started doing that. And I think that it all goes back to this idea of how adults learn, how people like to communicate, trying to counteract a little bit some of that anticipation anxiety that people have, trying to hold that space for people to be vulnerable, but, give them the information that you're going to be asking them about. And then for the advisor to also be stepping into that confidence. Like, you don't need to worry about like presenting something, like we've done that part. Now, we're going to ask you some questions. I think that can really help a lot and, can really change the types of conversations that we're having and the level of engagement in particular that we get from clients. I mean, I get asked that a lot too. Well, I had all these meetings and the client signed up and then, we had our 6-month review and nobody did anything. Yeah, I'm sure they didn't.
I mean, it's wonderful how you're like bringing down the anxiety levels. I'm just thinking someone that doesn't know what to expect. They can see it. They can feel like you're engaging all of the senses. It makes complete sense. Yet we're not seeing that. We're not seeing people using it. And I guess that's part of having these conversations around testing it because the technology is there.
Oh, yeah.
It maybe doesn't have to be difficult.
Yeah. I think that, more research needs to be done in financial planning and on financial planners and on actual financial planning relationships. So it's not, I will put all of the onus of advisors not knowing to do that on myself as an educator and a researcher within financial planning. People go to school to be financial planners, and unfortunately our textbooks don't yet have that research, and that's my fault, as an educator, as a researcher. And I want to make that better. But yeah, it's moments like this where these ideas are, creeping into advisors' minds and they're like, yeah, I do kind of say the same thing for the most part, in this particular meeting. Maybe it would be better if I just like recorded part of that and then told the client, hey, we're going to talk about this stuff. here's a recording on it. Come up with a couple of questions, send them to me. We're going to cover that. And I say, I know because I've talked to a few financial planning firms that do it, and they really like the results.
It's like one of those things. Once you've done it, you can't go back not doing it. It's like using a calendar booking system. You can't go back to the old way doing it.
Exactly.
What are you experiencing with in-person meetings? Because there's been this shift, like a lot of online meetings. Yet in South Africa, when we talk to financial planners, the quality of the in-person meetings are not that great.
The quality of the in-person ones are not.
The quality of the in-person meetings, like people are not arranging their offices in a way that's conducive for these conversations, right? They're not paying attention to all of the different elements. They might have a drinks menu, but that's pretty much where it ends.
That would get me in there. So actually, Dr. Sonia Luder, who did the study with Grable, they did another study where they did kind of like they set up offices like therapist offices, so like a couch and a table, or at least if you don't want to think of it like a therapist, like a living room, more comfortable. There's a couple of couches, there's a couple chairs, there's maybe a little like side table, but nothing like in between
table, okay.
The advisor and the client. Certainly the advisor is not sitting behind like a big old desk with the client, on the other side. Like that's not happening. And just doing that, changing the office itself, again, lowers anxiety for the client, which then can help them to open up more, can help them to express a little bit better. When the power dynamic is seen through the furniture, it makes people uncomfortable, like that makes people uncomfortable. So just thinking, about how your physical office is arranged. And if studies show that if it looks more like a therapist's office or like a living room, then there'll be lower anxiety and you'll probably end up having better conversations.
This theme of the kind of lowering anxiety makes so much sense, right? You just want someone to feel comfortable so you can have better quality conversations.
Right.
I'm thinking back to a few meetings I've had where the prospects or the clients would say, I'm not going to switch on my video today because I don't feel that great. Like I'm happy to have an online meeting, but I just feel a bit safer not having the video on. Are you seeing any research around how online meetings are maybe having better quality conversations or different types of conversations in the financial planning space?
I can't necessarily. Well, I know that Dr. McCoy with a bunch of Dr. Meghaan McCoy, she's at Kansas State with me. Basically the Megans run Kansas State. She has done some research with some of her graduate students, looking at the research on teletherapy and like how is teletherapy working for therapy clients. And there was lower anxiety, because like getting to the office and getting in the office and signing up the paperwork, like all of that falls away when all you have to do is just like click your, video. Also just, again, being in your own home, not having to be in like a doctor's office, also oftentimes feels or brings lower anxiety. There can also be things that the therapist learns or sees, because they see your home, like if it's crazy in the background, and people are talking about stress, this might be an indication that your whole home environment is a bit stressful. So those are things to think about. And it didn't really change. Well, I can't say that the conversations were better, but people were starting the conversations with lower anxiety. And so the way that the conversations happened, the fact that if they needed to cancel last minute and then reschedule, that was much easier than like having to go and, to the actual place and then find out and have to come back. Like it's like a whole extra unnecessary step that just kind of stresses people out. And I have heard of financial advisors, like, they know when the meeting is. And so then like 15 minutes before the meeting, they'll Uber Eats like some coffee to like the client's house. And, so then like doorbell rings, hot coffee is delivered, now we sit down and like have a conversation. I think like stuff like that's lovely, just being able to, I don't know if that made the conversation go better, but it sounds nice.
A surprise and delight, hey?
Yeah, exactly. And And we would do things like that. If they were in our office, we'd be like, here's a tea, or, here's a warm beverage. There's just something about holding warm beverages that usually calms people down. And so thinking about those experiences, I have also been told by some financial advisors that they think it's less distracting to meet online. I don't know how true that is, because I certainly have read other research that says the opposite. But maybe if a limited number of people were in the room, virtual room.
Depends on how many toddlers you have in your household.
Exactly. Yeah, dogs, toddlers, random cats. So, but I really wish we had that data. I really wish that we knew what was, because I think you're standing up, I'm standing up right now. We can, I talk a lot with my hands. I'm like a hand talker. And so I definitely do think that we can read some body language, but a lot of body language is lost. And if people don't have their cameras on, again, they may be doing that and that makes them feel more comfortable, and that's fine. But still then, as the other person, you're missing a lot of cues. This is also assuming and so, and when people are in your office, you can see, did they turn away from you? They're crossing their legs from you, or are they backing up away? And you can see some of that on camera, but not as much as you could see in person. Again, I think that this also depends on how much a financial planner is aware that they're watching the body language to try to figure out what's going on. I think some people are better at that than others, and that's neither here nor there. As humans, we pick that up about each other anyway. But we need more research. I definitely think that having the ability to do one or the other is great, because there are still some people that they're just going to want to see you, and that's fine. Other people are going to be okay with just being able to meet online, and that's okay too. So I think having the flexibility of one over the other, but yeah, certainly being aware of what makes an in-person meeting go well, being aware of what makes an online meeting go well too, also really matters. And it all kind of keeps circling back to this idea of how can we lower anxiety? How can we sort of set the expectation for either what it's going to be like in this office or what it's going to be like in the virtual meeting? What are we going to be asking people? What are we going to be talking about? How long is this meeting? Is it stopping and starting on time? One thing that can get kind of tricky with online that doesn't happen as much in person is interrupting. People don't like to be interrupted. And it gets harder and harder because, again, we have natural body cues that sort of show when a person is done when we're in person, that these are harder to pick up on when you're not meeting face to face.
Meghaan, this is such a lovely masterclass in thinking about reducing the anxiety. For me, it's around noting how that meeting was. What worked? Did you enjoy engaging with the clients? Did the clients enjoy it? What was their level of anxiety? And maybe it would be helpful to have some kind of framework for us to think about reflecting on a meeting. Do we just use a scale of 1 out of 10 and saying, okay, what was this? Was it a 5 or a 4?
I'm really
and why?
interested in questions, so I'm going to answer that with a yes. But
okay.
So one thing that I talked about in that webinar that I know that you watched was sort of this so in teaching, we say, tell them what you're going to teach them, set an agenda, then teach them, actually do what you said you were going to do in the agenda. Then
don't
remind
speak about
them
something else.
Remind them of what you taught them. So kind of did we hit all these wickets, or did we get through the meeting? But then ask them what they learned, or ask them if that was enough, or ask how they thought that class went, or in my mind, class. And you, for you, how was this meeting? So certainly I think it's important, if nothing else, that the advisor reflects on that. What if you did that, for 2 weeks, all of your client meetings, rate it, at the end, and be honest. If it's a 5 or a 4, because you were distracted or they were tired or whatever, then just note it. Not everything has to be a 10 out of 10. We want there to be some variation so that we can understand and start thinking about what happened. That was it you, was it them, was it where you were, whatever, technology wasn't working. So it's okay to have those lower score stuff happens. Again, this is just one big experiment, so there's going to be stuff that goes wrong. And, so do that for 2 weeks, like rate your meetings, but at least a couple of times, especially with those clients that you trust, you've got like maybe a closer relationship with them. You can just say at the end of the meeting, hey, I have kind of a weird, I'm trying a different thing. I listened to this podcast and they said to try it. I'm just going to try it. So I have a question for you. And the client will be like, okay. And then you say, all right, I want to know, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being amazing, like the best meeting you've had in a month, or 1, like you never want to have a meeting like this again. Where were we? What did we do? And they'll say, they'll probably, because they're nice and they like you, they'll probably say like, oh, a 9. And so then you say, well, so then why, like, what would have made it a 10? Like how could this have been a 10? And they may like say, oh, well, you didn't give me $1 million. Okay, yeah, I didn't. If that's the thing that's separating us, then
that's your expectations.
But if they say an 8, again, you can always say, well, what would have made it a 9? Like I'm trying to improve my meeting experience. I'm trying to just improve how I connect with clients. This feedback is really important to me. Can we have that conversation? Clients will tell you. They will be honest with you. They will not be afraid of it. They don't think it's weird. They are human. They want to have a good meeting too. They don't want to get to the end and be like, this could have been an email. We all feel that way sometimes. And so it is an incredibly valuable practice for the client and for you to get to the end of the meeting and say, how was this? Did we do what we set out to do? Are you feeling fulfilled, having been here, whatever the point of the meeting was? And, then ask them to rate the meeting. And there will be times that you rate the meeting differently than they did. And again, it's important to understand whatever they said. If it's a 7, why wasn't an 8? Get that feedback. But then also if you had thought it was like a 9, you don't need to tell the client that. You can just think about that by yourself. Like, well, that's funny. I thought I did a 9. I'm a 9. Don't do that. But thinking about it afterwards, for sure. And also, this goes back to kind of like the mentee thing, mentor-mentee thing. If you have another financial planner, whether it's a paraplanner or something like this, in the meeting with you, ask them to rate it too. It is about the collective experience of being in this meeting, not just your experience. That's kind of there's like
we can learn from like workout apps that tells you afterwards how did you think this workout went? Like even Netflix asks you,
right.
So start surveying. I'm definitely going to implement that in our business and reflecting on the meeting and referring back to it and seeing what worked. Meghaan, this has been a wonderful conversation. For people that want to read some of the articles, want to watch some of the webinars that you've hosted, like what's the best place to connect with you?
The best place is the kitces.com website. That's where most of the things that I write are. That's where most of the webinars that I do are. That's the best place to find it.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the best with your classes and your future research. And please continue with the wonderful content that you've been putting out.
Thank you.